certainly this is the most important finding in my career. It has really a huge implication for the understanding of development of Maya civilization.
Archaeologists discovered a sealed chamber beneath a Maya pyramid containing 3 bodies with DNA that defies evolution. Hidden in their genes was a mathematical code, astronomical data, and a radio frequency. Now scientists have found their living descendants in remote villages carrying the same altered DNA. As solar activity peaks in 2025, the ancient genetic program is activating. What they're becoming terrifies everyone involved. Breaking the obsidian seal, the technician stared at his computer screen and felt his stomach drop. He had been scanning the jungle floor for weeks, looking for the usual stuff, maybe an old road, maybe some house foundations, but this time was different. The laser showed something that made no sense. There was a void under the ground. It was perfectly round, exactly 23 feet across. It sat 40 feet beneath an ancient pyramid that was already 2,000 years old. Nature does not work like this. Water carves random patterns. Earthquakes crack stone in messy ways. But this circle was perfect. This was mathematics. This was planning. Someone built this on purpose. The team got orders to dig. It took them 3 weeks to cut through all the layers. They went through limestone and clay. They hacked through thick roots that fought back like living things. At 30 feet down, everything changed. The soil turned into blue clay. This clay was not from the area. Someone had carried it there from hundreds of miles away. This was important because blue clay holds water out. Whoever built this chamber wanted to keep something dry. They wanted to protect something from time itself. Below the clay, they hit stone. But these were not normal Maya blocks held together with mortar. These were massive pieces of black basalt fitted together so tight that you could not slide paper between them. There was no cement, no glue, just perfect stonework like the kind you see in Peru or Egypt, not in the middle of a Guatemalan jungle. Then they found the door. It was one solid piece of polished stone. No hinges, no handles, nothing to grab onto. The door was sealed shut with some kind of resin. When they tested it, they found out it was made from pine sap mixed with rubber and sulfur. Basically ancient concrete, but harder. The carvings on the door were all wrong. They were not the fancy faces and jaguars that the Maya loved to carve. Instead, there were geometric patterns, spirals, dots, lines. It looked more like a computer circuit board than religious art. The lead archaeologist wrote in his notes that his compass went crazy near the stone. The door itself was magnetic. This was not just a door. This was a shield. They had to use diamond saws to cut through it. When the blade finally broke through, there was a hissing sound. Compressed air rushed out of the chamber. That air had been locked inside for thousands of years. The seal was perfect. When they pushed a camera inside, everyone in the command tent went silent. What they saw would change everything we thought we knew about human history. The Chamber of the Three. When the camera feed flickered to life on the screen, nobody spoke. The walls inside the chamber were covered in something strange. It looked like black glass. The team later figured out it was obsidian that had been melted down and sprayed onto the walls. This created a mirror-like surface that reflected everything. The whole room looked like the inside of a dark crystal. In the center of the chamber sat 3 figures on raised platforms. They were not piles of bones like you would expect from something this old. These were actual bodies. The dry and sterile environment inside the sealed room had turned them into natural mummies. Their skin had dried out but not rotted away. They sat cross-legged facing each other like they were having a meeting that never ended. The bodies were draped in cloth that had turned to dust. The moment anyone touched the fabric, it disintegrated into nothing. But the jewelry stayed intact. There were pieces made of jade and gold. There was also a strange metal that had an odd shimmer to it. Whatever this metal was, it had not rusted even after sitting there for thousands of years. But the team was not looking at the jewelry. They were staring at the heads. The skulls were stretched out and elongated in a way that looked unnatural. The back of each skull went on longer than it should. Now, some ancient cultures used to bind babies' heads to change their shape, but these skulls were different. The eye sockets were bigger than normal. The jaw lines were thick and strong. These did not look like humans with deformed heads. They looked like something else entirely. They looked like a different type of being. The team immediately collected samples. They carefully removed tiny pieces of bone and tooth enamel. They even collected dust from the floor. Everything went into sterile containers. They shipped half the samples to a high-security lab in Mexico City. The other half went to a university in the United States. The scientists thought they were just dating another archaeological find. They had no idea they were about to discover something that would terrify them. When the carbon dating results came back, the first alarm bells started ringing. The organic material in the chamber was roughly 12,400 years old. That put it in the late Pleistocene era. That was the Ice Age. The Maya civilization would not exist for another 9,000 years. The Olmec were still 8,000 years away. These people were walking around when woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats were still hunting. They lived before farming even existed. According to every history book, humans back then were simple hunter-gatherers living in caves. They were definitely not supposed to be building sealed glass chambers with magnetic doors. The genetic time bomb, sequence X473. The real shock came when the geneticists started mapping the DNA. The computer threw up an error message. It could not sequence the strands properly. At first, the scientists thought maybe the DNA was too old or damaged, but that was not the problem. The DNA was too complex. The machine did not recognize what it was looking at. It could not identify the creature. Human DNA is made up of 4 basic letters. Scientists call them A, C, T, and G. These letters arrange themselves in patterns that tell your body how to build everything. How to make eyes, how to digest food, how to breathe. About 98% of our DNA used to be called junk DNA. Scientists thought it was useless leftover material from millions of years of evolution. Just trash sitting in our genes doing nothing. But in these 3 bodies, the junk DNA was not junk at all. It was organized. The lab technicians in Mexico City noticed something strange. There was a pattern repeating itself in the non-coding regions of the genome. In a normal human, these parts are random and messy, but in these subjects, the sequence repeated with perfect precision. It was a palindrome. That means it read the same way forwards and backwards. They labeled it Sequence X473. The lead geneticist had mapped thousands of ancient genomes in her career. She said something off the record that shook everyone. She said it looked artificial. Nature is sloppy. Nature makes mistakes all the time. Mutations happen constantly, but sequence X473 was flawless. It appeared in all 3 bodies exactly the same way, identical down to the last molecule. That does not happen in nature. Even identical twins have tiny differences in their DNA. These 3 people looked like they had been manufactured. When they ran the sequence through special computer programs, things got even stranger. The ratio of the base pairs and the distance between the repeating patterns matched something called the Fibonacci sequence perfectly. This is the golden ratio. This is the math that shows up everywhere in the universe. You find it in spiral galaxies. You see it in hurricanes. It appears in sunflower seeds and seashells. To find it coded perfectly into the junk DNA of an Ice Age human was like finding a modern barcode stamped onto a dinosaur bone. It meant someone did this on purpose. It meant design. The implications were terrifying. If this DNA was designed, who was the designer? This was 12,000 years ago. Humans were chipping rocks to make spears. We barely controlled fire. We certainly did not have gene editing technology, so who did? DNA as data storage. The team decided to look closer at the bones themselves. They ran tests to figure out what kind of water these people drank and what kind of food they ate. This tells scientists where someone lived. The results made no sense. The oxygen isotope levels suggested these people lived somewhere with different atmospheric pressure than sea level, but it also did not match the high mountains of the Andes. It did not match any known region on Earth from that time period. But here was something even stranger. The bone density was 40% higher than a modern human. Their skeletons were reinforced. This is exactly what you would need if you were dealing with higher gravity forces, or maybe if you were engineered to be some kind of warrior class, or a worker class built to endure extreme physical stress. Then came the really crazy part. The lab discovered that the DNA samples were glowing. When they exposed the samples to certain ultraviolet light frequencies, the DNA itself started emitting light. This is something you find in deep-sea jellyfish and certain types of fungi. You do not find this in primates. You definitely do not find it in humans. Why would anyone engineer a human to have glowing DNA? Unless the DNA was not just biology, unless it was a storage device. There is a theory in fringe science that DNA can store information better than any computer chip. 1 gram of DNA can theoretically hold hundreds of terabytes of data. The researchers started to think that sequence X473 was not a gene for eye color or height, it was a file. It was data stored in living tissue. They tried to read it. They converted the chemical base pairs into binary code, zeros and ones, just like computer language. The stream of information that came out was massive. Most of it looked like meaningless static, but hidden in that static were strings of numbers, mathematical constants, values that represent the orbital period of Venus, the rotational speed of Earth, the exact distance between the Earth and the Moon. These people were walking encyclopedias. They were living libraries carrying astronomical knowledge in their very blood. They were created to preserve information during a time of disaster. Remember the date, 12,400 years ago. That was the Younger Dryas period. The world was ending. Comets were hitting ice caps. Floods were wiping out entire coastlines. If you knew the end was coming and you could not save your cities or your books, where would you hide your knowledge? You would hide it in the one thing that survives everything, life itself. You would write your secrets into the genetic code of the survivors, the living descendants. The story did not end with 3 dead bodies in a sealed chamber. The team did what any good scientist would do. They checked to see if this genetic line still existed. They ran sequence X473 against the global database of modern human DNA. They expected to find nothing. They expected this bloodline to be extinct. They were wrong. The database search came back with a low probability match. It was not a direct hit. It was more like a faint echo. Traces of sequence X473 showed up in a very specific and very isolated population. Deep in the highlands of the Yucatan Peninsula, far away from the tourist beaches of Cancun, there are communities that still speak the old dialects. These are villages that the Spanish conquistadors never fully conquered. The terrain is too rough. The jungle is too thick. The people there have lived in isolation for centuries. Anthropologists have always noticed that these villagers are different. They are known for their incredible memory. There are elders who can recite oral histories that span hundreds of years without missing a single word. They have an unusually high resistance to viral infections. They rarely get sick, and they have very strict cultural rules about marriage. They do not marry outsiders, ever. Now scientists understood why. A field team was sent to collect fresh samples. They approached the village elders with respect. They told them they were doing a medical study on regional health. When they analyzed the fresh blood samples back at the lab, the results confirmed the impossible. The sequence was there. It was fragmented and broken down by thousands of years of genetic mixing. But the core architecture of X473 was still intact. These people were the great-great-great-grandchildren of the survivors of the Great Flood. They were the carriers of the database. The interviews with the elders revealed folklore that matched the science perfectly. The elders spoke of star ancestors who came down when the sky fell. They said their blood was borrowed. They said they must keep it pure for the return. They called themselves the guardians of the old breath. One elder was a man in his 90s who looked 60 years old. He told the researchers that his ancestors were given a burden to carry inside them. He did not know it was DNA. He described it as a song in the blood that sleeps until the great sun wakes it up. This connected directly to medical findings. The researchers discovered that cells carrying this sequence had a heightened ability to repair telomeres. Telomeres are the caps on the ends of your chromosomes. They get shorter as you age. When they get too short, you die. In these villagers, the telomeres regenerated faster than normal. They aged slower than regular humans. The machine in the swamp. But this gift came with a price. The villagers suffered from vivid collective nightmares. They often described dreaming of fire falling from the sky. They saw massive waves in their sleep. They dreamed of a city made of glass, shattering into pieces. Scientists call this genetic memory. It is controversial, but in animals, we know that trauma can be passed down genetically. Mice trained to fear a certain smell will have babies that also fear that smell without ever being trained. These people were remembering the end of the world from 12,000 years ago. But the most disturbing part was not the memory. It was what they found back in the jungle. Remember the magnetic anomaly at the first dig site? The magnetized door that made compasses spin? The team went back to the jungle and widened their search. About 5 miles from the original chamber, deep in a swampy area that locals refused to go near, the laser scan picked up a second anomaly. This one was not a small chamber. It was a ring. A massive, perfect circle 300 feet across, buried 50 feet underground. The team drilled a core sample down into it. They hit metal, not gold, not copper. They hit an alloy made of titanium, vanadium, and iridium. Iridium is extremely rare on Earth, but it is common in asteroids. This was space-age metal buried in the Stone Age, and the metal was vibrating. The sensors picked up a low-frequency hum. It pulsed exactly once every 11 minutes. It was like a heartbeat. The team set up sensitive equipment to analyze the frequency. When they converted the sound wave into a digital pattern, it looked familiar. It was the inverse of sequence X473. The machine in the swamp was broadcasting a signal designed to be received by the DNA in the blood of the villagers. It was a lock and key system. The DNA was the key. The machine was the lock. So here was the situation. There was a population of humans carrying a hidden code in their blood. There was a massive ancient machine buried nearby that hummed on a frequency matching that code. The machine was currently in standby mode. The pulse was weak, but geological records showed that solar activity was increasing. The magnetic field of Earth was weakening. The researchers believed the machine was powered by telluric currents. These are natural electrical currents that run through the Earth's crust. As the Earth changed and as the Sun entered a new phase of activity, the machine might be powering up. What would happen when the signal got strong enough? Nobody knew, but everyone was afraid to find out. The star map and the hollow road. Among the artifacts found in the first chamber was a tablet made of blue stone. Nobody could identify what kind of stone it was. It looked like lapis lazuli, but it was much harder. Nothing they tested could scratch it. Etched into the surface was a star map. Archaeologists love finding star maps. Usually they show harvest cycles or track the movement of Venus across the sky. But this map was different. It showed the night sky, but the positions of the stars were wrong. They were shifted. When astronomers put the data into their computers and ran simulations, they dialed the clock backwards in time. The stars on the tablet lined up perfectly with the sky, as seen from Central America in exactly 10,500 BC. That date again. The Younger Dryas, the time of the Great Disaster, the time when the world was ending. The map focused on the constellation of Taurus. Specifically, it highlighted the Pleiades star cluster. The Maya called this cluster Sub. They believed it was the home of their ancestors. But the tablet showed something more. There was a line connecting our solar system not to a star, but to a dark patch of empty space between the stars. Modern telescopes know this area well. It is a dense molecular cloud, a place where new stars are born. But the tablet labeled it with a glyph that translates to the Sky River or the Hollow Road. Theoretical physicists who looked at the data suggested something that sounded like science fiction. They said it could be an Einstein-Rosen bridge. Most people know this by another name, a wormhole. The tablet seemed to be a navigational chart for a stable passage through space-time, a shortcut through the universe. The glyphs surrounding the map told a story. They showed beings called the Lords of the Dual Mask descending from the Sky River. These beings were shown as distinct from humans. They were taller. They had elongated heads just like the bodies in the chamber. The carving showed them handing something to humans. The ancient artists drew it as seeds of light. For years, people thought this was just mythology. Humans love stories about gods coming down from the sky and giving gifts. We always assumed they meant corn or farming knowledge. But now, with the DNA evidence, the seeds of light took on a completely different meaning. They were not giving us plants. They were not teaching us to farm. They were giving us genetics. They were altering our biology. They were hiding information inside us at the molecular level. The story carved into the stone described a war in the heavens, a fire that eats the dark. It said the lords came here to hide something precious, the Lords of the Dual Mask. The tablet explained that the lords could not stay on Earth. The planet was too heavy for them. The air was too thick. Their bodies were not built for this world, so they made a choice. They left their treasure inside what the tablet called vessels of clay. That meant us, humans. They used us as living containers. This changed everything about the ancient alien theory. For years, people said aliens came to Earth to enslave us. They said aliens made us mine gold or build pyramids. But this evidence suggested something completely different. They did not come here to use us as workers. They came here to use us as a safety deposit box. We are the backup drive for a civilization that might have been losing a war. They stored their most important knowledge inside our DNA, and then they left. The tablet ended with what looked like a prophecy, or maybe it was just a schedule. It spoke of the cycle of the 13 Baktuns. This is a Maya calendar cycle that ended in 2012. Many people thought the world would end that year. It did not. But the tablet also mentioned something else. It talked about the era of the awakening. It said this era would begin when the sun spots bleed. Right now, in 2025, scientists say we are entering a solar maximum. This is a period when the sun becomes extremely active. It shoots out massive solar flares. It creates huge magnetic storms. Experts predict this solar maximum will be one of the most intense in recorded history. The sun is waking up, and when the sun wakes up, other things might wake up too. The machine in the swamp has been humming louder. The descendants in the highland villages have been having worse nightmares. The elders say the dreams are more vivid now, more real. They say they can feel something building, something coming. They describe it as pressure in their blood, a vibration they cannot explain. The latest lab tests showed something that terrified the scientists. They exposed samples of sequence X473 to simulated solar radiation. They wanted to see what would happen under conditions similar to a solar maximum. The sequence began to unfold. It started to activate. It began producing proteins that have never been seen in human biology before. New proteins, unknown proteins, proteins that do not exist in nature. The researchers did not know what these proteins would do. They did not know if they were dangerous or helpful. But one thing was clear. The DNA was not just storing information. It was waiting for a signal, waiting for the right conditions, waiting for the sun to reach a certain level of activity. And when that happened, it would trigger something inside the people who carried it. A change, a transformation. Something written into their genes 12,000 years ago was finally ready to activate. The Amazon chamber and the children of the return. Deep in the most remote sector of the Amazon rainforest, there is a coordinate that does not exist on any public map. Pilots flying over the area are told to go around it. Local people refuse to talk about it. For decades, satellites passing over this specific spot showed nothing but trees. Just thick green canopy, just jungle. But 3 months ago, a rogue laser scan cut through the leaves and revealed something impossible. It was a perfect geometric square buried 60 feet underground. The team that went in expected to find maybe some old temple ruins or pottery. What they found was a sealed chamber, and inside that chamber were 7 bodies. Just like the first discovery, these were not skeletons. They were perfectly preserved. They looked like they were sleeping, but they were not like modern humans. They were taller. Their skulls were 30% larger than a normal human head, and when the field medics tried to take tissue samples, the needles would not go through the skin. The skin was too tough. They had to use diamond-tipped drills just to get a drop of blood. When they ran the DNA, the results came back as edited. The DNA was clean. It was efficient. It was streamlined like computer code, written by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And hidden in the non-coding regions was binary code, actual zeros and ones written into the biological fabric of a human being from the Ice Age. When experts translated the sequence, it was not poetry or prayers. It was a radio frequency, a specific signal. 2 miles east of the chamber, buried beneath a massive swamp, they found the source. It was a machine shaped like a teardrop, roughly the size of a school bus. It was made of a titanium alloy that modern science cannot replicate. It had no rivets, no welding marks. It looked like it had been grown rather than built, and it was active. The machine was emitting a pulse, a heartbeat, and the frequency matched the binary code in the DNA perfectly. The machine was a transmitter. The DNA was a receiver. These people in the chamber were not just rulers or priests. They were technology. They were organic devices designed to interface with this machine, but there was more. Living in the exclusion zone around the site was a tribe. They had no name in modern records. They avoided all contact with outsiders. When researchers finally got a hair sample from one of their camps, the lab went silent. These people shared the same genetic markers as the sleepers in the chamber. They were descendants. For 12,000 years, they had been breeding and passing down this code, keeping the bloodline pure. The awakening. The tribe called themselves the Children of the Return. Their oral history said they were left behind to watch the metal seed until the Skyfathers came back to harvest. They lived near the machine for a reason. They were guarding it, or maybe they were waiting for it to wake up fully. Inside the sealed chamber, the ceiling had a star map carved into it. It showed the sky as it looked 12,500 years ago. There was a bright line pointing directly to a dark corridor in the Taurus constellation, the same place the Maya were obsessed with. The same region their entire civilization tracked in the night sky. Right now, the sun is reaching peak activity. Solar storms are increasing. The Earth's magnetic field is weakening, and the machine in the Amazon is responding. Its pulse is getting faster, stronger. The descendants are having intense dreams every night. They say they feel something changing inside them, a pressure building in their blood. In the lab, scientists exposed samples of the modified DNA to solar radiation. The sequence started to unfold. It began producing proteins never seen before in human biology, unknown compounds, strange chemistry. The DNA was not just information storage. It was a program waiting to run, a biological switch waiting to flip. We are not just looking at ancient history. We are watching something wake up after 12,000 years of sleep. The star map does not point to where they came from. It points to where they went. And the machines buried in the jungle are not relics. They are beacons. The government has classified the coordinates of both sites. Scientists involved in the project have been told to stay quiet. But the question remains, were humans created as a storage device for an alien race? And what happens when the alarm clock finally goes off? We may be about to find out. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.